Chapter 1. Introduction. The Foundations of Cross-Border Trade. Canada and the United States share one of the most significant trade relationships in the world, shaped by centuries of economic, political, and geographical factors. The two nations, linked by the longest undefended border, have developed deep economic ties, creating the largest bilateral trade partnership globally. This book explores the evolution of this relationship, beginning from early colonial trade to the modern agreements shaping commerce today. Trade between Canada and the USA has historically been influenced by resource availability, industrial growth, and shifting political policies. The two economies are highly integrated, with goods, services, and investments flowing freely between them. Understanding the development of tariffs, trade agreements, and economic policies is essential to comprehending the current state of North American trade. This book will analyze the key trade agreements, disputes, and policies that have shaped the trade relationship between these two economic giants. It will also explore the role of tariffs, supply chains, and regulatory changes in fostering or hindering trade. By examining past and present developments, we can better predict the future trajectory of Canada-US trade relations. Chapter 2. Early Trade Relations. The Fur Trade and Colonial Economy. Before Canada and the USA became independent nations, trade between their territories was driven primarily by natural resources and European demand. The fur trade played a crucial role in the economic development of both regions, with indigenous groups, French and British traders exchanging pelts for European goods. The Hudson's Bay Company, HBC, and the Northwest Company dominated the early fur trade, exporting beaver pelts to European markets. Meanwhile, American traders operated along the St. Lawrence River and Great Lakes, creating economic linkages that predated official political borders. As the agricultural economy grew in the 18th and 19th centuries, trade in wheat, timber, and fish became vital. The close geographic proximity of the two regions facilitated exchanges, setting the stage for future economic cooperation. However, as political boundaries became more defined, trade policies shifted. The imposition of British colonial trade restrictions and American protectionist policies created early tensions that foreshadowed future trade disputes. Chapter 3. The Reciprocity Treaty of 1854. First Steps Toward Free Trade. The Reciprocity Treaty of 1854 marked one of the earliest formal trade agreements between British North America, Canada, and the United States. Signed under pressure from both economic necessity and political diplomacy, this treaty eliminated tariffs on a wide range of goods, including timber, coal, and fish. The treaty led to significant economic growth in Canada, particularly in resource industries, and strengthened cross-border economic integration. It also paved the way for increased American investment in Canadian infrastructure, such as railways. However, the treaty was short-lived, ending in 1866 due to growing political tensions between the two nations. The U.S. Civil War and protectionist sentiments in Congress led to its repeal, forcing Canada to seek alternative economic strategies, including a greater reliance on British markets and domestic industrialization. Chapter 4. Protectionism and the End of Reciprocity. Following the termination of the Reciprocity Treaty in 1866, Canada faced an economic downturn as it lost its duty-free access to American markets. The end of reciprocity was largely driven by rising protectionist sentiments in the United States, exacerbated by post-Civil War economic policies. American industries, seeking to shield themselves from foreign competition, advocated for higher tariffs on imported goods, including those from Canada. In response, Canada sought to strengthen its economic ties with Britain and diversify its trade relationships. The emergence of a more protectionist approach in both countries set the stage for future trade disputes and negotiations. Canada's economic strategies during this period laid the groundwork for its eventual confederation in 1867, as leaders realized the need for a unified economic policy. Chapter 5. The National Policy and Canadian Tariffs. In 1879, the Canadian government, under Prime Minister John A. Macdonald, introduced the National Policy, a set of economic measures designed to protect Canadian industries from American competition. This policy implemented high tariffs on imported manufactured goods, particularly those from the United States, to promote domestic production and economic self-sufficiency. While the national policy stimulated growth in Canadian manufacturing, it also led to strained trade relations with the United States. American exporters faced barriers in accessing Canadian markets, which fueled further economic tensions. Despite these challenges, the policy remained in place for decades and shaped Canada's economic development well into the 20th century. Chapter 6: Trade. During the Industrial Revolution, the late 19th and early 20th centuries saw rapid industrialization in both Canada and the United States. The expansion of railways, advancements in manufacturing, and increased urbanization transformed trade dynamics between the two nations. Cross-border commerce grew, particularly in natural resources such as timber, coal, and minerals, which were in high demand for industrial purposes. Despite the overall increase in trade, tariff barriers and protectionist policies continued to limit full economic integration. The United States maintained high import duties on Canadian goods, while Canada upheld its national policy to safeguard its industries. This period saw the gradual evolution of trade practices, with both nations exploring ways to balance domestic economic growth with international trade opportunities. Chapter 7: The impact of World War I on bilateral trade. World War I had a profound impact on trade between Canada and the United States. As Britain focused its economic resources on the war effort, Canada turned increasingly to the US for trade and investment. The demand for raw materials such as wheat, lumber, and minerals surged, leading to significant economic growth in Canada. American industries also benefited from wartime production, and cross-border trade expanded as Canada supplied essential resources to its southern neighbor. However, the war also highlighted the vulnerabilities of reliance on foreign markets, prompting discussions about economic independence and post-war trade policies. Chapter 8: The Great Depression and the Smoot-Hawley Tariff. The Great Depression of the 1930s severely disrupted global trade, including commerce between Canada and the United States. In 1930, the U.S. government passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which imposed some of the highest tariffs in American history. These tariffs significantly restricted Canadian exports to the U.S., exacerbating economic hardships in Canada. In retaliation, Canada implemented its own tariff increases, further straining trade relations. The protectionist policies of both nations deepened the economic downturn, highlighting the risks of trade barriers. This period underscored the need for future trade agreements that would promote economic stability and cooperation between the two countries. Chapter 9: The Canada-USA Trade Agreement of 1935. In response to the economic devastation caused by the Great Depression and the restrictive tariffs of the Smoot-Hawley Act, Canada and the United States sought a new approach to trade. In 1935, the two nations signed the Canada-USA Trade Agreement, a landmark deal that marked a shift away from protectionism toward economic recovery through mutual trade concessions. This agreement reduced tariffs on key goods, such as agricultural products, manufactured goods, and raw materials. It also laid the foundation for future trade negotiations, fostering a more cooperative economic relationship. The benefits of this agreement became evident as trade volumes began to recover, illustrating the importance of reducing trade barriers for economic growth. Chapter 10: Post-World War II Economic Cooperation. Following World War II, Canada and the United States emerged as key economic partners in the global trade system. The war had reinforced the necessity of economic interdependence, as both countries had relied heavily on each other for military supplies, resources, and financial support. In the post-war period, international institutions such as the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, facilitated trade liberalization. Canada and the U.S. played active roles in these discussions, working together to reduce tariffs and expand bilateral trade. The economic boom of the 1950s and 1960s saw increased investment, industrial growth, and trade integration between the two nations. Chapter 11: The Rise of the Auto Pact, Strengthening Industry Links. One of the most significant trade agreements between Canada and the United States was the 1965 Auto Pact, APTA, which revolutionized the North American automobile industry. Prior to the agreement, Canadian auto manufacturers faced high costs due to limited economies of scale. The Auto Pact allowed for duty-free trade in automobiles and automotive parts between the two countries, leading to increased efficiency and competitiveness. The pact contributed to the growth of the Canadian auto sector, attracting major investments from American car manufacturers. It also ensured that a significant portion of auto production remained in Canada, creating jobs and boosting exports. The Auto Pact set a precedent for sectoral trade agreements and deepened economic ties between the two nations. Chapter 12. The Energy Trade, Oil, Gas, and Hydroelectricity. Energy trade has been a cornerstone of Canada-USA economic relations, with Canada emerging as a key supplier of oil, natural gas, and hydroelectric power to its southern neighbor. The construction of pipelines, such as the Trans-Canada Pipeline and the Keystone Pipeline System, facilitated the efficient transportation of energy resources across the border. Canada's abundant natural resources and the United States' growing energy demands led to long-term agreements in energy trade. This sector remains a crucial aspect of bilateral trade, contributing to economic stability and energy security for both nations. However, political and environmental concerns have occasionally led to disputes, particularly regarding pipeline projects and climate policies. Chapter 13. The Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, FTA, of 1988. The 1988 Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, FTA, was a historic milestone in bilateral trade relations. It was the first comprehensive free trade deal between the two countries, eliminating tariffs on a wide range of goods and services. The agreement aimed to enhance economic integration, increase market access, and foster competition. The FTA faced political opposition in Canada, with concerns over national sovereignty and potential economic dependence on the US. However, the deal ultimately led to increased trade, investment, and economic growth for both nations. It served as a precursor to the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which further expanded the scope of trade liberalization. Chapter 14. NAFTA, a new era in trade relations. In 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, came into effect, further expanding the free trade framework established by the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement. NAFTA eliminated most tariffs between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, creating one of the largest free trade zones in the world. For Canada, NAFTA provided increased access to the US market, which boosted exports and industrial growth. However, it also led to economic restructuring, as some industries faced increased competition. While NAFTA was widely credited with stimulating trade and investment, it also generated concerns over labor conditions, environmental standards, and the outsourcing of jobs. Chapter 15. The effects of free trade on Canadian and US industries. Free trade agreements, particularly NAFTA, had significant effects on various industries in both Canada and the United States. The manufacturing sector experienced major shifts, with some industries thriving due to better market access, while others struggled due to increased competition. The Canadian auto and energy industries benefited greatly from NAFTA, but sectors such as textiles and certain manufacturing industries faced challenges. The agricultural sector also saw significant changes, as reduced tariffs allowed for greater cross-border competition and collaboration. Overall, free trade agreements led to economic growth, but also raised questions about wage disparities and job security. Chapter 16. Trade disputes and tariffs, softwood lumber and beyond. Despite strong trade relations, Canada and the United States have experienced numerous trade disputes, with softwood lumber being one of the most persistent issues. The US has periodically imposed tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber, citing unfair subsidies, while Canada has challenged these measures under trade agreements. Other disputes have included dairy trade restrictions, steel and aluminum tariffs, and disagreements over intellectual property rights. While mechanisms such as NAFTA's dispute resolution system have helped address these conflicts, trade tensions continue to be a recurring feature of bilateral economic relations. Chapter 17. The role of agriculture in cross-border trade. Agriculture has long been a crucial component of Canada-USA trade, with both countries exchanging goods such as wheat, beef, dairy products, and fresh produce. The removal of tariffs under trade agreements allowed for increased agricultural exports, benefiting farmers and food industries on both sides of the border. However, disputes over supply management policies, food safety regulations, and market access have led to tensions. The dairy industry, in particular, has been a contentious issue as Canada's quota system conflicts with U.S. demands for greater market access. Chapter 18. E-commerce and digital trade between Canada and the USA. With advancements in technology, digital trade and e-commerce have become key aspects of Canada-USA trade relations. Online retail, cloud computing, and digital services have expanded cross-border transactions, reducing the reliance on physical goods trade. The rise of companies like Amazon, Shopify, and other e-commerce giants has transformed trade dynamics, requiring new regulations on digital taxation, data privacy, and cybersecurity. Recent trade agreements have begun addressing these issues, ensuring that digital trade remains an area of growth and innovation. Chapter 19. Trade in services, financial, technology, and tourism. Trade in services has become an increasingly important aspect of Canada-USA trade, covering industries such as financial services, technology, and tourism. With the rise of globalization and digital transformation, cross-border collaboration in banking, investment, and technology innovation has expanded significantly. The financial services sector benefits from strong regulatory frameworks that facilitate cross-border banking, insurance, and investment. Technology companies, particularly in artificial intelligence and software development, have leveraged trade agreements to foster innovation. Meanwhile, tourism remains a major contributor to both economies, with millions of travelers crossing the border annually for business and leisure. Chapter 20. Environmental and labor considerations in trade agreements. As trade has expanded, so have concerns over environmental and labor regulations. Free trade agreements have historically been criticized for contributing to environmental degradation and failing to protect workers' rights. In response, Canada and the United States have incorporated stricter environmental and labor provisions into modern trade agreements. Agreements like NAFTA and USMCA include commitments to reduce carbon emissions, protect biodiversity, and enforce fair labor practices. Efforts to address climate change through carbon pricing and sustainable trade policies continue to shape bilateral trade discussions. Chapter 21. USMCA, the modern evolution of NAFTA. In 2020, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, replaced NAFTA, updating trade provisions to reflect modern economic realities. The USMCA introduced new rules on digital trade, intellectual property, and labor rights, while also addressing long-standing trade disputes. Key changes included stricter labor standards in Mexico, higher thresholds for duty-free trade in e-commerce, and new automotive manufacturing requirements. While the USMCA reinforced the commitment to North American trade integration, it also reflected shifts in political priorities and economic strategies. Chapter 22. Supply chains and manufacturing integration. The integration of supply chains between Canada and the United States has been a defining feature of their trade relationship. Industries such as automotive, aerospace, and pharmaceuticals rely on seamless cross-border supply chains to maintain efficiency and competitiveness. Trade agreements have facilitated just-in-time manufacturing, where components move freely across the border before final assembly. However, disruptions such as tariffs, border restrictions, and global crises like the COVID-19 pandemic have highlighted the vulnerabilities in supply chain dependency. Chapter 23. The impact of political shifts on trade relations. Trade relations between Canada and the United States have been influenced by political shifts, with each administration bringing different trade priorities. Protectionist policies, diplomatic tensions, and economic nationalism have occasionally strained trade cooperation. The Trump administration's tariffs on steel and aluminum, renegotiation of NAFTA, and focus on America First policies created challenges for Canada. In contrast, other administrations have emphasized multilateralism and economic collaboration. Political factors will continue to play a role in shaping future trade policies. Chapter 24. Future challenges and opportunities in Canada-USA trade. Looking ahead, Canada-USA trade will face both challenges and opportunities. Key issues include adapting to technological advancements, addressing climate change, and ensuring fair trade practices. The rise of automation and artificial intelligence may reshape labor markets, while trade policies must balance economic growth with sustainability. Geopolitical tensions, supply chain realignments, and digital trade expansion will also impact trade relations. Strengthening economic resilience and fostering cooperation will be essential for maintaining a prosperous trade partnership. Chapter 25, Conclusion. The road ahead for bilateral trade. The trade relationship between Canada and the United States has evolved significantly, from early fur trading to modern digital commerce. While challenges such as trade disputes and economic shifts remain, the two nations continue to be each other's most important trading partners. Future trade policies will need to focus on innovation, sustainability, and cooperation. By addressing key economic, environmental, and technological challenges, Canada and the United States can strengthen their trade partnership for generations to come.